Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. My winter resting type mounted dendrobiums, because there are a few in pots. I'm just going to put some clips together of each one in turn, so they'll be short, but there's a few sort of points to make as I go along. First one. So I've got to get these down to water them effectively. They will get some water. That's a noblei type, Comet King. And the point I wanted to make there is look up the cane, the leaved cane. It's just starting to form ridges. Now if you look at the older canes, that's natural as they age, but that's this year's growth. That is just starting to show signs of lack of hydration. Only just. It's not a big deal. Not going to go into panic mode and throw it in a bucket for a week. Just needs a drop of water to stop it getting too far. Now this one is being rested for the simple reason it is not growing. Terminal leaf at the top, blatantly obvious, sticking straight up on this one. No sign of another one coming. So you can tell when these type of canes stop growing. There is a tiny little bit of root activity, a few green tips, but not many. So there's a very, very slight element of growth in the root department, but nothing on the plant whatsoever. So this plant doesn't need food, and it doesn't need much water. The only tiny little bit of water it needs now and again is just to stop it dehydrating. And if I induce some buds on this, they're going to get taken straight off. It's not a strong plant yet. Although that looks like a nice strong new growth for this year, it's only about half the size it should be. And I nearly lost this plant. So it's recovering. So what I would like to see on that one, come the spring, is another new growth. And 2 would be good, but we'll see what we can do. It now has a reasonable root system. Now it didn't have one, now it has. So this year we've managed 1 new cane and a reasonable root system for the size of the plant and what it's got to support. That's more than enough roots to just support what is in effect 4 leaves. So yeah, trickle of water for that one. My resting type dendrobiums on mounts haven't seen hide nor hair of water since the 13th of December. So that's the length of time they've gone. But it's cool in here. Yeah. Humidity is kept reasonable, which helps with stopping them dehydrate, keeping the humidity at a reasonable level. But yeah, so a drop of water for that one. Right, that's a noblei type on a mount. Now this one doesn't drink much water. Catty puss, variety fluffy eye. Just woken up all bleary eyed. Oh, puscats, you've been snoozing. Hey, you've been snoozing. What you doing then? It's Mojo just woken up. He's been sleeping since well, since after his breakfast, basically. You soppy cat. Right, back to orchids. Now, this one was got back in the summer at Malvern as quite a small plant. It is, in fact, an anosmum, but it's the variety Laos, which has the yellow in it. It did grow a few new roots after being mounted. Currently totally leafless. But the canes aren't shrivelling. They're staying reasonably plump. So again, trickle of water, nothing much. Yeah, and hopefully this one will grow on next year with quite a few new growths. I'm not expecting it to bloom, but it might do. We'll have to wait and see. It's not going to show nubbins yet. It's a little bit too early. Just inspecting now. Having said that, some bright spark's going to say, I saw one on that. No, there aren't any. So that's that little one. New plant for me, that one. Looking forward to the blooms. That's why I got that one, not to replace the original anosmum, alongside, so that's not a replacement. Now, this is another relatively new plant, got last year sometime, Dendrobium Lindleyi, and it's grown quite a reasonable root system, and it has pushed up a couple of new growths, and it's mainly that large one at the back and the two larger ones out to the right hand side. Doesn't seem to be up to much on the left hand side. That is big enough to bloom, but whether it will or not depends on whether it had enough time here before it went into its rest. Now these are a right pain to determine whether they're dehydrating or not, because that's what the pseudobulbs look like, or canes, sorry. They do have that crinkled look, that's natural. That's what they look like, so it's ever so difficult to tell whether it's getting a bit dehydrated. But the cane I'm using is this bottom right one, which is yet to get the deep crinkles. Yeah, so a drop of water for that one, simply because it hasn't had any for flipping ages. But it's not dehydrated. Leaves have still got a bit of a sheen to them, good colour, and this one doesn't drop its leaves for quite a few years. It does eventually drop its, well, leaf I should say, leaf per cane on this one. I'll be surprised if it blooms, but it would be nice if it did. It certainly won't be showing signs of spike yet, far too early. But anyway, it's grown on a little bit in its first year with me. I'm hoping to grow that on into a big plant, basically. That's not going anywhere, that one. So, Lindleyi. And this is Lindleyi's smaller cousin, Jenkinsii. I thought it might be nice to put these two next to each other so you can see the difference in it's the size that's the difference. If it wasn't for the scale of putting one next to the other, they'd almost look identical, which they are incredibly similar. So Lindleyi being the larger cousin, Jenkinsii much smaller canes, and the Jenkinsii tends to grow flat. There's another main difference. The canes lay alongside each other in a flat nature and don't have a habit of sticking out, whereas Lindleyi does. Yeah, the canes tend to head away from the base a little more. Jenkinsii has a habit of just growing out flat. Now this has put up a lot of new growth this year, and I'm going to stick my neck out and say, and it will bloom. I don't know how well it will bloom. It did do a mass blooming early last year. Yes, so I'm getting me years in a muddle as we've just clicked over one. And then the plant got tidied up on the mount, sort of removed and put back on a bit more prettily, shall we say, because it had a lot of bald patches with leafless shriveled dead bits in the middle. So it will bloom later. Whether it will do a mass blooming again, I don't know. It would be good if it did. We shall see. But yeah, it's grown on well this year. Pushed out a lot of roots in under the moss. It's well attached now, and yeah, it's a good sized plant, that one. And again, that's going nowhere. This is the one we had fun with last year. When the spikes started to come out, I could clearly see them, but they really didn't show up on camera. And people were, not blatantly, but implying that I was telling porky pies because they couldn't see them. So I had to go back like a couple of weeks later with I think I went back with a pointy stick and just went, spike, 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 there they are. They are true. It is true that it has spikes. Anyway, we'll probably have to do the same again when they start this time. They are tiny when they first start. So there we go. And another difference, the spikes on Jenkinsii come out from about halfway up the cane. And the spikes on Lindleyi, I believe, come out from the base of the cane, so yet another difference. So the blooms look similar, but they're, on close inspection they're not the same. And Jenkinsii has an average of probably 4 or 5 per spike, whereas Lindleyi can have a dozen, and they're larger. So hopefully we'll get both. Right, I'm sticking this one in because this is my rule breaker. This is classed as a dryer in winter, not a true resting type. Dendrobium hercoglossum. And I'm going to do a spotlight video on this, but simple reason I don't class this as a winter rester, because the canes are still growing. And for me, the way I grow it, they continuously grow right through the winter. Those are the new growths up the top, and a couple have started to arch over. But those new growths grow on through the growing season, they grow on through the first winter, they carry on growing through the second growing season and the second winter, and don't stop until their third season. So I can't see how that can be classed as any form of resting dendrobium at all. And I haven't found anybody else that's got it that grows it like I do. Well, tough. That's how I grow it. And that's what it does for me every year. The oldest canes around here, totally leafless, around the back of the plant. Coming up to the sort of next season's growth, these lower ones, followed by the next season's growth, followed by last season's growth. Well, that's how I grow it. And you will see later in the year why I've still got it, why I grow it, and why I grow it the way I do when it comes into bloom. It's been a pretty good showstopper now for the last 3 or 4 years, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. It's getting a bit of a monster, but I don't care if it takes up half the grow room. It's not going anywhere. Quite a few people have had kikis off of this one. This has found its way into many other homes, but the mother plant is not going anywhere. Another biggie. I've got a job to get far enough back to film some of these, but I'm only doing a quick look at these anyway. This is Dendrobium chryseum, the original big box orchid, because these canes that were unceremoniously chopped off were over 1 metre long. That's why the box was so big. The next year's growth, following on from when I've got it, were these. And they didn't reach their full size because I didn't have a good root system. So I was lucky to get that amount of growth that season. This is the last season's growth, and these are still growing. So if canes are still growing in January, it's either not acclimatized properly yet, or it's not a true rester. It's as simple as that. And I got a feeling this one's going to come into a similar category as the hercoglossum, because if the latest season's growths grow on through the winter, then resting it would stunt them. They would stop growing. Yeah, so they wouldn't reach their full length, which I'd like them to do. Now we may get blooms on this for the first time, simply because although these canes down here are not up to full size, they are doing what they're supposed to do during this winter. They've dropped over half their leaves and they're still dropping them. So these lower canes from 2 seasons ago are becoming deciduous, which is what it's supposed to do, and then it should bloom on either the bare canes or the canes with very few leaves left. It's not going to bloom up here. That's like next year's lot. So we'll see. I'd love to see some blooms on this. I haven't seen any yet, so I'm still looking forward to it. But again, although it's a beast and it's a giant of a plant, it's not going anywhere because it has an interest for me. Now, if the blooms only last 5 days and are not very big and not very fragrant, then it might have to go. But at the moment, it has an interest value. I want to see it progress and see what I get from it. So at the moment, taking up loads of space, but it has a place. So although it takes up a lot of space, it's not space that I would use for much else. So it's happy where it is. We'll keep it going. Obviously my Findlayanum Hannah is going nowhere. As it's unique in the whole world, it's the only one that's allowed to be called that, thanks to my RHS award. This one is now predictable. Had it long enough that, you know, oldest canes end up right down there with no leaves on. You can see how well it bloomed by the sheer number of spikes all over those older canes. And the season that followed those were this lot. This will be this year's blooms on these canes, and there are a lot of them. a lot. So I think we should get a mass blooming again this year. And then last season's growth is the lot up the top. They're still growing, and they shouldn't be. This is supposed to be a winter rester, but these canes are still growing. So, do I stop watering it? No. As long as those canes are still going to grow, it will get a trickle of water. And this one gets a bit more than a trickle because it's still growing. But I don't want to jeopardize the blooming. It is supposed to have a winter rest to help induce the blooms. But this one blooms May-June time. It's not a late winter, early spring bloomer. It's a late spring, virtually into summer. This was in bloom at Malvern, middle of June. So it's really a summer bloomer. And as such, I'm not sure it needs a full winter rest to induce the blooms. Because the buds don't even start until sort of, beginning of May. Well, that's not exactly late winter, early spring, is it? So this one grows a bit funny, but it's settled into a nice pattern. I'm happy with the way it grows. I'm also happy that the canes that I'm expecting to bloom have not shriveled to any great extent. They are starting to drop a few leaves now and again, not in great piles on the floor type of things, but you can see, they're yellow. They tend to yellow from the base of the cane and work their way upwards until they're all gone. But even some of these really old canes have still managed to hold on to a leaf or two. But yes, as long as I've got canes still in active growth, then it's not going to get totally dried off and left dry for huge amounts of time. So that's how I'm growing that one. This one's Dendrobium aphyllum, and we recently looked at this because this was a project plant, so it's not going to have changed much since then, so just a quick look. But it's doing what it's supposed to be doing and dropping its leaves as it heads through winter. So I just give them a gentle tug when I get it down, simply because if I let them fall, they'll fall in somebody else's pot. So this is doing what it should be doing, and I've got 2 canes on here from this year. And the one that just didn't grow. So we'll get blooms on those 2 canes, and by the time we get to the point where the nubbins start to show, I'll be surprised if there's any leaves left at all. There might be just an odd 1 or 2, but that's a fully deciduous type dendrobium. It just drops its leaves in the winter time, and that's followed by blooming. But it's a true rester, needs that rest. And this is another annually deciduous one. This is primulinum, although I think it's called something else nowadays. Although I believe they're still synonyms, so I'm quite happy to carry on calling it primulinum, because that's what it's been called since I got it. This is doing what I'd expect it to be doing, and dropping its leaves on the latest growths as it goes through winter. And we'll get blooms on this as well, on the canes that are currently leaved or attempting to drop their leaves. This plant's coming on okay, seems to get a bit stronger each year. And again, you keep your eye on your canes. See, they're not really showing any signs of shrivelling yet, so in theory I could miss the watering out on this one. But bearing in mind it was last looked at on the 13th, and it probably won't get looked at now until the end of January, it's going to get a drop. I don't want it shrivelling while I'm not looking at it, because it lives in a place where I just don't get the orchids down very often this time of year. So we'll give it a dribble and let it do its thing and dump its leaves all over the place as it goes through winter, and then we'll get the blooms later in the year. This is another mounted noblei type that was a gift, so I haven't seen the blooms on this one yet. I see no reason why it shouldn't bloom. It's strong enough and healthy enough and pushed up quite a few new canes, but I don't know, I don't know what the blooms are going to look like. I could look it up, but I don't like doing that sort of thing. I like surprises. Now you've got an older cane there out to the right, and you can see the wrinkles on it. That's not last season's growth. The other canes are. Yeah? So you can see the difference between an older cane and a new cane. Some of the new growths didn't reach full size, but then it had to grow a root system. which it's now done. I mean, that's more than a good enough root system for a plant that size. So we should get some blooms on there, and if this one tries to bloom, I will let it. It's a strong enough plant to do just that. It's not growing, it's finished growing a while back, terminal leaves on all the canes, and it's just maintaining its leaves at the moment. Being a noblei type, the leaves are going to stay on there for some considerable time. They will eventually drop and you will get leafless canes, but they're not annually deciduous or anything like it. Can't remember the name on this one, but I do have it. So yeah, looking forward to some blooms on that one, seeing what sort of size and colours and numbers of and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's grown quite well on the mount, quite pleased with that. We'll see what that does as the year progresses. Not all nobleis are late winter, early spring. Some go well into spring before they bloom. And as I haven't had this one long, I don't know what it's going to do. So we'll have to wait and see, won't we? Well, this is Dendrobium findlayanum, which is a resting type. It's not annually deciduous, but it does drop its leaves quicker than a lot of other types do. This one's doing what I'd expect it to be doing at the moment, which is dropping leaves all over the flipping place, all over the other plants. As I said, I was going to say I try and catch them before they fall, but some of them beat me to it, and some of them look like they ought to come off and then decide they're going to just hang on there. Now, this one, the older canes get the creases on the bulbous bits. So these canes down here have bloomed. And then when you get up to the latest growths, they don't. They hold their shape, at least through the first winter. Now, I got a couple of marks on this one, which were a bit worrying. So I actually sprayed it with a fungicide. It's only on those couple of bits, and it hasn't got any worse. It hasn't spread, it hasn't showed up anywhere else, so I'm not particularly worried about it. But this one's off to somebody else, so it's not going to be here much longer. A lot of people like to grow this one just for the shape, the plant, irrespective of the blooms. Blooms are quite attractive, but I have other dendrobiums similar to this, and I've had this one quite a long time now. I would say I've probably just got a little tired of it. And this has had quite a few kikis in the past that have gone off to other people. Quite honestly, to be technical, some of these growths are actually kikis. If you look at this one here, yeah, this big long one here, that's not actually attached to the base, that's actually a kiki with its own set of roots. So this one would split up. This one's a kiki here, hanging out in mid-air, that's not even attached, that bit. So it does grow kikis, but it will bloom. There's no reason for this not to bloom on the canes that haven't already. See, this one grew a kiki out the end of the cane, which that'll probably bloom, that bit. Yeah, so got a little bit of a strange growth pattern, but yeah, a lot of people like the shape of the plant. But it can get quite large. It can be grown in a pot and stood upright, but you would have to stake it, or it will arch over just by the sheer weight of all these bulbous bits and the narrow base to the canes. So it can be grown upright, but you'd have to work at it. Whereas if you let it hang, it'll just do its own thing. And I would suggest that's how you would naturally find that in the wild. Just attached to a branch or a trunk and arching over and hanging down, and the blooms coming out almost in mid-air. This monster is Dendrobium Nestor, which I have a problem with. First year I got it, it was in bloom, and it grew, I think it grew one nice big long new cane, which then bloomed. The following year I think it grew two, and last year it grew one and aborted one, and the one it grew didn't get anywhere near full length, and it got some serious spotting on the sheath on the cane. I don't think there's anything wrong with it as such, but I did make what is endearingly deemed a mistake on anosmum types, is cutting old canes off unless they are totally shriveled and useless, like this bit. That's shriveled and useless, but that got bashed and formed a break. This is still plump and firm, as are all the other old canes, and apparently on anosmum, if you take the old canes off before they've shriveled, you reduce the strength of the plant and the vigour, so that may be its demise. But having just got it down, believe it or not, the nubbins are forming on the cane, just starting. There, you can see the little swelling on the nodes. So this cane, it's even splitting the sheath there at that point. So the buds on this are starting to form. That'll be the first of the winter resters that I've seen anyway. Yeah, they're coming out this side. It blooms on alternate sides with several blooms per little spike. So it is going to bloom, but I'm hoping for a miraculous recovery on this plant. I really don't want to lose this. It really is one of my favourites, and the blooms are just stunning and highly fragrant, brilliant. But it is a fully deciduous type, annually deciduous, like anosmum, which is half of what it is basically. But yeah, it didn't grow from the base very well. I mean, it's got some reasonable roots. I wouldn't say it's excellent, but I need to keep my eye on this in the coming season. I need to get this to grow better, whatever that... It might need remounting. I don't know. There's signs of some new roots that look to me like they may have been eaten off. So we may have some undesirables lurking in the crevices in behind that moss. I've had that before, where a couple of tiny little snails have made their home, and you never see them. They don't ever seem to come out to play in visible sort of state of play, but they do nibble. And occasionally, on one mount, I couldn't work out what it was, but every time I watered it, I got lots of little black dots came out. And it turned out I had a load of those wood lice, or pillbugs I think they're called in some countries, were living in behind the moss, and they were chewing everything. Now, they weren't really damaging the plant, but they were slowly chewing away the flipping mount. And all the bits came out every time I watered it. So we may have some undesirables living in there. So I might actually try remounting it. Anyway, we shall see. But the first of the true winter resters is starting to show its buds. Goody! Yeah, well, they certainly weren't there last time I looked. So progress. And the last one is Dendrobium anosmum, so that's the parent of one of the parents of Nestor, the last one we looked at. And this one is behaving a little strange because it's only just starting to yellow its leaves, and in past years most of the leaves would have been yellowed and gone by now, so it's late. And I was chatting in the comments section on John Benedict's channel. He was showing a Schomburgkia, I think it was, with God knows how many spikes. Far too many for me to count anyway. But I asked him how his anosmums were doing, because he's got a set of them. You know, I don't know how many, but there's lots. Good specimen sized plants that we usually see in bloom each year. And he was saying that his are about 4 weeks late and are still green, and so are a lot of other growers in his area, which I think is Florida. Yeah, mine's late. Mine's late doing autumn. Bearing in mind we're heading towards spring, so this is probably going to bloom late this year. This one definitely went downhill when I cut the old canes off. So on this one I can be certain that that's what happened. The number of new growths went down to 1 in last season. Mind you, it is a good one. You know, compared with previous canes, I think this is the only old cane that's longer, and that could be one of mine, I can't remember. But if you look at the average length of the canes, this is a much longer cane. And believe it or not, I'm not even sure that's finished growing. Well, it is now, because I've finished it, even if it hasn't. There's no point in letting it get any longer. I could jeopardise blooming. So yeah, this one produced a lot of roots this year, so it's progressed well in the root department. A lot of those roots have gone around the back of the mount and everything. I've got a few canes that are showing signs of starting to shrivel, but as long as they've got plumpness on this type of deciduous dendrobium, they need to stay there. Even though you might not look at like the look of the plant with all of these leafless canes, it does look tatty in some people's eyes, but if you want to grow this type of plant, that's how they grow. So if you don't like the look of it, then perhaps it's not for you. Plus it's a true winter rester, which some people can't do. But you're rewarded by fantastic blooms with gorgeous fragrance. They smell of raspberries. Freshly squashed raspberries, I'll say. But this one's just starting to come into autumn now. Last time I took this one down, it was still fully green, whereas some of it is now starting to fade. They normally start to fade at the base of the cane and work downwards. This one's decided to start in the middle. There's no point in looking for nubbins on this yet. This is going to be late. I've got no idea why. All I can think of is that when it's normally bright and sunny and warm, it wasn't. That's all I can think of. And so it's just got a slightly out of season feel to it. But nonetheless, while it's still green, it's certainly not going to be forming nubbins yet. So this one's going to be late. Nestor is going to be in bloom long before this one. Last year, they just about crossed over. So, you know, one was sort of fading as the other one came into bloom, if I remember rightly. So, we will get blooms. We will only get blooms on this cane, because it's the only new one it grew. And given the root system it's now got, and the fact that no old canes have been removed, hopefully this one will now perform better. And, yeah, it should be a lot better. Do you know, I've got a horrible feeling I've got these plants back to front somehow or other. It's just looking at the base. I know when I bought the anosmum, it looked like it had just been hacked off a tree. All the roots had been chopped off, emphatically. And it had a linear base with lots of places where older canes were. I might have got the tags round the wrong way on this. Who knows? We'll know when it blooms, because the anosmum blooms are paler in colour than the Nestor. So we might have had a tag muddling session. I'm getting awful at keeping plants labelled. Nonetheless, we will get blooms, and at that point we can get things identified. And my New Year's resolution is, as and when I either get a plant in the kitchen to do something with it, or I'm waiting for blooms, I will get tags on the plants this year. It's not like I haven't got them. I've got a box full of the flipping things. So anyway, that's the last one of the winter resters, a true rester, this one as well. But as it's still green, this is going to get some water, obviously, as they've all come down today to get some water, having not had any since the 13th. But I've got a thing to try. Nestor will be the first one. On the deciduous type Dendrobiums, it basically, all the instructions in the old books and the old growers and whatever, you know, which might not be true, but hopefully they're based on what would happen in the wild. It basically says, do not reintroduce watering and feeding until you see new growths. And I've always sort of gone along with the theory that if a plant's going to produce a huge mass of blooms, where does it get the energy from? And it's going to take it from the stored resources in the plant, which is going to use them all up, I would say. Yeah? And you're not giving it any help whatsoever. So in the past, I've always started introducing my watering and feeding as the buds start to swell to stop the plant being totally drained. But that may delay the new growths. And therein could be the problem. That although my theory is pretty sound in my mind, I ought to stick to the rules and not give them any feed or reintroduce watering frequencies until the new growths show. We shall see. I may try it with one and not the other and see if we see a difference. Anyway, that's it for those, and see you next time. Bye for now.